It was one of those mornings where everything seemed to go wrong right from the start. As soon as I opened my eyes, I was hit with a bone-deep fatigue that made me feel like I hadn't slept a wink. It wasn't just tiredness, it was the kind of exhaustion that made every movement feel like wading through molasses. For the past few days I'd been feeling a little off, but today was on a whole new level. My entire body ached as if I'd been wrung out like an old dish rag. My back throbbed, my shoulders were locked up tighter than a rusty hinge, and even my feet felt tender, like I'd been walking barefoot over gravel all night. Looking back, I hadn't noticed how much I'd been wearing myself thin. The week had been a whirlwind of tasks, scrubbing floors, prepping meals, running errands, and juggling the endless list of responsibilities that came with keeping the house in order. It was like I'd been on autopilot, moving from one chore to the next without so much as a moment to breathe. But today my body had slammed on the brakes. It wasn't just whispering at me to slow down, it was screaming. I always thought I was one of those people who could power through anything, but apparently my body had other plans. Guess even the toughest nuts crack eventually. Every muscle in my body felt tight, as if they'd been wound up too far and were ready to snap. The ache in my neck was relentless, like I'd been hauling around a sack of bricks. Even lifting my arms felt like a monumental task, and my legs seemed weighed down by invisible anchors. This wasn't the usual, I need a nap kind of tired. It ran deeper, like my very core had burned out. I tried to ignore it and keep moving, but my body wasn't having any of it. I sank onto the couch, hoping that maybe sitting still for a while would help. Instead, the aches seemed to deepen, like my body was punishing me for not listening sooner. Frustration bubbled up inside me. I hated feeling helpless, like I wasn't even in control of my own body. And here's the thing, I'm not good at doing nothing. Sitting around makes me restless, like I'm wasting time I'll never get back. But that day, I didn't have much of a choice. As I tried to find a comfortable position, spoiler alert, I didn't. Every shift sent a new stab of pain shooting through me. Stretching, adjusting, leaning back, it was all useless. My body had drawn a line in the sand, and no amount of stubbornness was going to make it budge. The house was oppressively quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel even more alone. The only sound was my own breathing, heavy and uneven. Just as I was contemplating whether to give in and spend the rest of the day flat on my back, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Noah, my stepson. A flicker of relief washed over me at the sight of him. If there was one person I could count on, it was him. Noah had this way of picking up on things, like he had a sixth sense for when someone needed a little kindness. From the moment I'd married his dad, we'd hit it off. He was considerate, thoughtful, and always willing to step in when someone was struggling. A rare combination, especially for a teenager. "You doing okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with genuine concern as he stopped in front of the couch. His eyes were soft, studying me like he could read all the discomfort I was trying so hard to hide. I forced a small smile, though it probably came out more like a grimace. "I'm fine," I lied, the words catching in my throat. But the truth was I wasn't fine, not even close. Noah didn't look convinced, and I could tell he saw right through me. For a moment I hesitated. I didn't want to burden him with my problems, but the sharp ache in my back was becoming unbearable. Swallowing my pride, I let out a sigh and said, "Actually, I could use some help. My back's killing me. Would you mind giving it a quick massage?" Even as I asked, a knot of anxiety formed in my chest. I wasn't used to admitting I needed help. It always felt like I was showing weakness. But at that moment I didn't have much of a choice. It's never been easy for me to ask for help, especially with something so personal. There's always this fear of making the other person uncomfortable or feeling like I'm imposing. But Noah, my considerate and empathetic 24-year-old stepson, wasn't the type to shy away from lending a hand. I knew deep down that he wouldn't hesitate, though that didn't stop a flicker of awkwardness from creeping in. When I finally mustered the courage to ask, his response was immediate and reassuring. "Of course I'll help," he said, flashing a warm smile that put me at ease. His understanding gaze and willingness to step in made me feel a little less burdened. Noah had always been the kind of person who naturally knew when to offer support, no matter how small the request. It's one of the things I admired most about him. His instinct to care, to show up without making a big deal out of it. As he moved behind me and placed his hands on my tense shoulders, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. It wasn't something I'd ever asked him to do before, and I wasn't certain how it would feel. But the moment his hands began kneading the knots in my muscles, a wave of relief swept over me. The tightness in my shoulders started to ease under his slow, deliberate movements, and I let out a small sigh of gratitude before I even realized it. His touch was firm but gentle, the kind of touch that seemed to know exactly where the pain was and how to work it out. My eyes fluttered shut as I allowed myself to sink into the moment, the stress and tension that had clung to me for days slowly unraveling with every motion of his hands. For once, I wasn't thinking about chores, errands, or everything waiting to be done. I was simply existing in a rare, blissful moment of relief. You know, it's funny how you don't realize just how much you've been carrying until someone helps lighten the load, even for a little while. Moments like these remind you that it's okay to lean on someone else now and then. The house was still and quiet, amplifying the soothing rhythm of his hands working over my sore back. It was a welcome break from the relentless demands of the week, and I found myself grateful, not just for the relief he was giving me, but for his kindness. Noah had a way of being there when you needed it most, and it was hard not to feel lucky to have someone like him in my life. As he continued, his hands moved with care and precision, loosening the tension that had made every movement a struggle just hours earlier. "You've got a really nice physique," he said suddenly, his voice soft and casual, almost as if he was thinking out loud. His tone was light, free of any awkwardness or hidden meaning. The comment caught me off guard, though not in a bad way. I wasn't expecting it, especially in the middle of such a quiet, caring moment. For a second, I wasn't sure how to respond, but then I realized it was just a simple compliment, nothing more. There was no ulterior motive, no undertone. Just Noah being his genuine, thoughtful self. A small, shy smile crept onto my face as I replied, "Thanks," my voice a little quieter than usual. There was something about his sincerity that made me feel lighter, like the heaviness of the day had lifted just a bit. You know, sometimes it's not the big gestures that make a difference. It's the small, unexpected kindnesses. A kind word, a moment of connection, can mean everything on a tough day. And for me, that moment of acknowledgement made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The tension in my back continued to fade as Noah worked his way down, each movement deliberate and soothing. For the first time in days, I felt a deep sense of relaxation, a quiet peace that settled over me like a soft blanket. It's funny how the smallest acts of kindness can stay with you, lingering long after the moment has passed. That day, Noah wasn't crossing any boundaries or being inappropriate. He was just being thoughtful, offering a kind word that hit me exactly when I needed it most. Sometimes it's not about grand gestures. It's the simple, genuine moments that remind you you're not invisible, that someone notices you and cares enough to show it. By the time the massage ended, I felt like a completely different person. The ache that had been grinding me down all day was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. Sitting up slowly, I stretched, testing my back, and smiled warmly at Noah. "Thank you so much," I said, my voice filled with the kind of sincerity you can't fake. He smiled back, easy and kind. "No problem," he replied, his tone casual but carrying a warmth that went beyond his words. "Anytime." In that small exchange, I felt something shift. It wasn't anything dramatic, there was no tension or awkwardness, but something about our connection felt different. We'd always gotten along well enough, but this moment added another layer to our bond, something quieter and more genuine. It was as if that simple act of kindness had bridged a gap I hadn't even realized was there, solidifying our friendship in a way words never could. You know, being a step-parent is tricky. It's rewarding, sure, but it's a path full of sharp turns and blind spots. Moments like these, though, remind you why it's worth navigating all the bumps in the road. Noah's thoughtfulness had gone beyond what I expected. He didn't have to offer his help, let alone in such a considerate way. And yet, he did, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That small but meaningful gesture wasn't just about the massage itself. It was a testament to how far we'd come in understanding and respecting each other. When you're a step-parent, there are so many uncertainties, times when you question your role or wonder if you're making a difference. But as I sat there reflecting on the moment we'd shared, I felt profoundly grateful. Grateful not just for the physical relief he'd given me, but for the mutual respect and trust we'd built over time. As the days turned into weeks, life settled back into its usual rhythm. Noah and I went on sharing the little moments that made up our lives. laughing at dumb jokes, chatting about work and school, or just sitting together in a comfortable silence. It was the kind of routine that feels unremarkable but is secretly the foundation of something solid and enduring. Nothing seemed to have changed between us, and yet everything had. There was an unspoken understanding now, a stronger bond that made those everyday moments feel just a little more meaningful. But then one afternoon, the ordinary took an unexpected turn. It was a regular day, the kind that blends into all the others. I was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. The fatigue of the day was catching up to me. My feet ached from standing too long, and my mind was foggy from running through an endless checklist of things that still needed to be done. And then out of nowhere something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not at first, but it carried a weight I couldn't quite place. One of those subtle realizations that sneaks up on you, like a sudden draft in a quiet room. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I could feel it. The unmistakable sense that things weren't as simple as I'd thought. I stood at the counter, absently chopping vegetables, my hands moving almost on autopilot while my thoughts drifted. The weight of the day pressed heavily on me, and every muscle in my body ached for a break. All I really wanted was to sit down for just a moment, to catch my breath. As I worked, Noah walked into the kitchen. He paused briefly, taking one look at me before his expression softened with concern. He didn't say anything right away, but I could tell he'd noticed the exhaustion etched across my face. After a moment he spoke, his voice gentle yet filled with quiet insistence. "Let me help you relax again," he said, his tone calm and reassuring. "You've been working hard all week, and it's clear you're worn out." I froze mid-chop, his words catching me off guard. His offer wasn't something I'd expected, and yet it immediately eased some of the tension I was holding. There was a sincerity in his voice that struck a chord, a thoughtful recognition of just how drained I felt. For a moment I stood there unsure of how to respond, but also deeply touched by his perceptiveness. His concern reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt, that someone saw me and cared enough to do something about it. It wasn't just the words he said but the way he said them, warm and genuine, as if he truly wanted to help. I let out a small hesitant laugh, the kind that escapes when you're not sure how to handle unexpected kindness. "Are you sure?" I asked softly, glancing up at him. My voice betrayed my hesitation, not because I doubted his sincerity, but because part of me wondered if I was asking too much. He gave a confident nod, his smile steady and reassuring. "Of course," he said simply, as though helping me was the most natural thing in the world. There wasn't even a flicker of hesitation in his expression, and I realized he wasn't just offering out of politeness. He truly wanted to help, and his eagerness felt like a balm to my frayed nerves. With a mutual understanding, we shifted gears. For now, instead of unwinding, we worked side by side in the kitchen, finishing the meal I had started. Together, we chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, and adjusted spices, falling into a natural rhythm that felt surprisingly comfortable. It wasn't something we did often, but somehow it felt as though we had done this 100 times before. As we worked, the atmosphere in the kitchen lightened. We laughed about small things, swapped stories from the week, and let the flow of conversation carry us. The rich aroma of our cooking filled the room, mingling with the warmth of our shared energy. By the time we set the table, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment in the air, not just from the meal itself, but from the connection we'd built while making it. Once everything was ready, we sat down to eat, savoring the flavors we'd brought to life together. There was an ease to the moment that made the simple act of sharing a meal feel special, and I found myself grateful for not just the food, but for Noah's company. Later, as the evening stretched on, Noah suggested we wind down properly. "You deserve a chance to relax," he said, his tone both firm and encouraging. We dimmed the lights, letting the room fill with a soft, amber glow, and lit a few candles. Their flickering flames cast a warm, calming light, the kind that makes everything feel just a bit softer around the edges. The atmosphere shifted into something serene and inviting, like the kind of quiet space you crave after a long, chaotic day. As the calmness settled in, I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. I didn't say it out loud, but I couldn't help thinking how thankful I was. Not just for the peaceful ambience, but for the care and consideration Noah had shown me throughout the day. Moments like this, small but significant, were a reminder that kindness doesn't always need to be grand to be impactful. Sometimes it's as simple as creating space for someone to breathe. The soft flicker of the candles cast warm, golden light across the room, dancing gently against the walls. The soothing strains of music hummed softly in the background, filling the space with a tranquil, almost dreamlike ambience. For the first time that day, I felt the weight of exhaustion begin to lift, the tension in my body loosening with each passing moment. It was as if the room itself had conspired to provide the solace I didn't know I needed so badly. Noah, ever attentive, seemed to sense this. He approached with the same quiet assurance that had come to define him, his presence both calming and steady. "You've been on your feet all day," he said gently. "Let me help you relax." There was no hesitation in his words, no trace of self-interest, just an offer simple and sincere. I hesitated briefly, but when he guided me to a nearby chair, his touch light but firm, I allowed myself to follow. His hand on my shoulder was grounding, a subtle reminder that it was okay to let someone else take care of me for once. He positioned me carefully, making sure I was comfortable, and then began to massage my shoulders with practiced ease. His hands moved with a deliberate rhythm, his touch firm yet gentle, expertly finding the knots that had gathered at the base of my neck and working them loose. Each press and stroke seemed to coax the tension out of me, drawing it away until all that remained was the soothing sensation of relief spreading through my muscles. The effect was almost immediate. My body sank into the chair, the day's stress dissolving with each purposeful movement of his hands. But it wasn't just the physical relief that washed over me. It was the quiet intimacy of the moment, the unspoken care in his gestures, that struck a chord. I could feel my mind beginning to unwind, the ever-present buzz of worries and anxieties quieting as I focused solely on the steady, comforting rhythm of his hands. I closed my eyes, letting myself surrender to the calm that enveloped me. The gentle glow of the candles, the soft melody of the music, and Noah's touch all worked in harmony to create a space where I could finally breathe. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at ease. Then, just as I was beginning to drift in the tranquil rhythm, he paused. His hands rested lightly on my shoulders, their warmth still lingering, but the stillness caught my attention. I opened my eyes, slightly startled by the sudden quiet, and glanced up at him. His voice broke the silence, soft and measured. "Would you like me to keep going?" he asked, the question carrying a note of hesitation. Then, after a brief pause, he added almost reluctantly, "I could do something more. Something that might help you feel even better." I tilted my head slightly, trying to read his expression. There was something different in his tone, tentative, almost vulnerable. Before I could respond, he lowered his voice, speaking just above a whisper. "A happy ending," he said, his words hanging in the air like a weight. For a moment I froze. The phrase landed with unexpected force, catching me completely off guard. My heart skipped a beat as my mind scrambled to process the meaning behind his words. I turned slightly in my seat, meeting his gaze. His expression was hard to decipher, confident yet tinged with uncertainty, as though he wasn't sure how I would respond. The silence between us stretched, thick with unspoken tension. His words lingered in the air, their weight undeniable. It wasn't just the bluntness of what he'd said that caught me off guard. It was the way he said it, with a raw honesty that left me feeling both exposed and strangely secure. I searched his face, looking for answers, and what I found surprised me. There was no arrogance in his expression, no hint of expectation. Instead, there was an openness, a vulnerability that made it clear he wasn't making light of the moment. He was offering something, yes, but not out of obligation or desire. It felt deeper than that. In that stillness, I realized how much our relationship had shifted over time. What had started as casual and simple had grown into something far more complex, built on trust, understanding, and the quiet, unspoken bond we had formed. The connection between us wasn't just friendship. It was something deeper, though neither of us had named it until now. As I sat there trying to find the words to respond, a quiet thought surfaced. This wasn't just about the suggestion itself. It was about what it represented, the vulnerability, the trust, the recognition of how far we had come together. And while the moment was unexpected, it wasn't unwelcome. It was uncharted territory, yes, but it was also a space where I felt safe enough to explore. A cascade of emotions surged through me. A tidal wave of curiosity, hesitation, and something far more profound that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about the moment, it was about everything that had led to it. The unspoken tension, the quiet glances, the moments we'd both pretended to ignore, but had never truly escaped. It was all rushing forward now, leaving no room for doubt. For a fleeting second, my mind wrestled with the implications of what might come next. Would crossing this invisible line change everything between us in ways we couldn't undo? But then I looked at him, really looked, and the uncertainty dissolved like mist in the morning sun. There was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity that felt like both a question and an answer. I felt my body respond before my thoughts could catch up. A warmth unfurled deep within me, spreading like fire through my veins, igniting parts of me I hadn't realized had been waiting for this. The tension of the day, the heaviness I'd carried for so long, seemed to transform into something entirely different, something sharper, more alive. My breath hitched as the realization hit me. The desire, so carefully tucked away until now, could no longer be ignored. It was undeniable, insistent, and it surged forward with a force that left me breathless. I hesitated for the briefest moment, caught in the gravity of what this meant, and then, like a wave cresting and breaking, I felt myself let go. "Yes," I whispered, the words soft but carrying the weight of my surrender. A smile spread across his face. Not the playful grin I'd seen 100 times before, but something deeper, more knowing. There was a spark in his eyes, an anticipation that sent my heart racing. His expression wasn't just one of excitement. It was a reflection of understanding, of mutual acknowledgement that we were both stepping into something unknown together. He took a step closer, and the air between us seemed to change. It felt thicker, charged, as though the room itself was holding its breath. "I'm ready for you today," he said, his voice low and steady, each word infused with warmth that settled in my chest like a soothing balm. There was no hesitation in his tone, just a quiet confidence that carried with it a promise, a pledge of something more. The way he said it, so sure, so direct, spoke to me on a level I hadn't known I needed. It wasn't just a statement. It was an offering, one that resonated deeply within me, sending ripples of electricity through my entire being. I watched him closely, my heart pounding in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. His gaze softened as he stepped even closer, and though his smile lingered, it now held a new intensity. It was as if the look in his eyes mirrored everything I was feeling. The vulnerability, the anticipation, the unspoken understanding that this moment marked a turning point we could never take back. The world around us seemed to fall away. The noise, the distractions, the weight of everything that wasn't this. It all disappeared. The only thing that mattered was him. His presence, his words, and the way they wrapped around me like a cocoon, making me feel seen, understood, and for the first time in what felt like forever truly wanted. He reached out, his movements deliberate but unhurried, as though each step, each gesture, carried a meaning beyond the physical. His hand brushed against mine, and even that simple touch felt like a spark, a connection that ran deeper than I could have anticipated. As he drew closer, his tenderness was unmistakable, yet beneath it lay a quiet intensity that was entirely new to me. It wasn't just about the moment, it was about everything that had been building between us, every unspoken word, every glance that lingered too long. And then, as his hand rested gently on my shoulder, I realized something had shifted. The boundary we danced around for so long had finally dissolved, leaving behind something raw and true. It wasn't just desire. It was trust, vulnerability, and a connection that felt like it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In that instant, I understood. We had crossed into something new, something neither of us could fully define yet, but it felt undeniable. It was subtle but powerful, a current pulling us both into uncharted waters. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The very air around us felt charged, humming with a weight I couldn't quite name but understood instinctively. It wasn't tension. It was something richer, deeper, something alive with the unspoken acknowledgement of what was unfolding between us. It wasn't just about the physical space we shared. It was about stepping into an emotional expanse that neither of us had dared to fully explore until now. Every second seemed to stretch, expanding as if time itself had decided to pause and let us savor this fragile yet powerful connection. There was no urgency, no need to rush through it. Each moment felt intentional, as if we were carefully unpacking something delicate, layer by layer, piece by piece, until only the raw truth remained. His presence was steady, grounding, and his every movement seemed designed to match the rhythm of this new reality we were creating. His touch, deliberate yet unhurried, felt like an unspoken promise, a reassurance that I was safe in this vulnerability, that whatever walls I let fall would be met with nothing but understanding. The intimacy wasn't just in the closeness of our bodies but in the way he looked at me, as though he could see past every mask I'd ever worn, every layer of armor I'd built around myself. And for the first time I didn't feel the instinct to guard myself. In his gaze I saw acceptance, unvarnished and unconditional, and it was a relief so profound it nearly took my breath away. Every touch, every glance carried a weight that went beyond mere attraction. It wasn't fleeting or superficial. It felt enduring, like the discovery of something sacred we hadn't known was there until now. There was a quiet reverence in the way he moved, as though he too recognized the gravity of this moment. It was dizzying, yet soothing, an impossible contradiction that somehow made perfect sense. My heart raced with the intensity of it, but at the same time, I felt an overwhelming calm settle over me. It was as if every jagged edge within me had been smoothed out, every loose thread finally woven into place. The world outside seemed to fade, retreating until it was nothing more than a distant memory. In its place was a cocoon of stillness and connection, a space where nothing mattered except what was happening here, now between us. We moved together in a way that felt effortless, like we had been rehearsing this dance for years without realizing it. Every gesture, every word, every moment seemed to flow seamlessly into the next, as if we were following a rhythm only we could hear. I felt myself letting go, not just of the tension of the day, but of every doubt, every hesitation I'd carried for as long as I could remember. Each second stripped away another layer of fear, leaving behind only the certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. And in that moment something shifted. The connection between us deepened, took root, became something I could feel in my bones. It wasn't just physical, though there was no denying the pull between us. It was something more. Something I couldn't name but could feel with every fiber of my being. I realized then that this wasn't just a fleeting moment or a chance encounter with something extraordinary. It was a discovery, a mutual unveiling of truths we hadn't known we were carrying. Each breath we shared seemed to align, each movement in perfect harmony, as though we had tapped into something timeless and unspoken. The intensity of it was overwhelming, yet somehow it didn't consume me. Instead, it enveloped me in warmth, in safety, in a sense of belonging I hadn't known I was searching for. Every touch felt deliberate, not just an action but a statement, a quiet declaration of trust, of respect, of something deeper than either of us could fully understand. And in that perfect, infinite moment I realized I wasn't just letting him in. I was finding a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. Every worry, every lingering fear dissolved into the air, leaving only peace in its wake. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole. There was no tension, no hesitation, no questioning what this was or where it might lead. It simply was in its purest and most undeniable form. In that moment, as everything else faded into insignificance, I let myself surrender completely, mind, body, and soul, trusting him without hesitation. It wasn't a leap of faith. It was a certainty, as though every fragment of doubt had dissolved into the stillness around us. As we moved together, seamlessly attuned to the rhythm of one another's presence, it became evident that this was no ordinary exchange. It wasn't just an experience, it was a revelation. A profound, unspoken truth emerged between us, filling the space with clarity and meaning that left me breathless. For once, there was no guilt, no second-guessing, no dark corners of doubt lurking in the back of my mind. It felt as though the chains of the past had been broken, the weight of every expectation and fear falling away like leaves in the wind. The constant noise of the outside world was silenced, leaving us suspended in a stillness so complete, it was almost sacred. We were utterly free from judgment, free from the burdens of what had come before, free to simply exist in the purity of this connection. In this sanctuary there was no need for explanations or validation. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, not even to ourselves. It was about being fully present, immersed in the essence of us. The silence between us spoke more than words ever could. Every glance, every touch, every breath carried a language all its own, weaving a story of trust, understanding, and something far deeper than either of us could articulate. This wasn't just a physical connection. It was a convergence of souls, a meeting at a depth I hadn't known was possible. Each moment uncovered new layers of our bond, as if we were rediscovering parts of ourselves and each other that had been hidden until now. There was an electric charge to it, not frantic or overwhelming but alive, a current that hummed softly, resonating between us in perfect harmony. And yet, the satisfaction I felt went beyond anything physical. It was the knowledge that we had entered this moment fully, without hesitation, fear, or reservation. There were no barriers left to hide behind, no unspoken fears holding us back. Only the trust we had built, allowing us to embrace this connection for everything it was. What we shared was more than a fleeting moment. It was a kind of unity that transcended the surface, weaving itself into the very fabric of who we were. It was the meeting of two people, not just bodies but spirits, melding together in a way that felt timeless and infinite. As we lingered in the quiet stillness that followed, I felt an unshakable contentment settle over me. A peace that affirmed what we had just experienced was nothing short of extraordinary. When I looked into his eyes, I knew without question that we had found exactly what we needed in each other. Not more, not less. Just enough to fill the spaces we didn't even realize were empty. And so, as the moment lingered, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for the connection we had forged but for the clarity it brought. This wasn't merely the end of an experience. It was the beginning of something much greater.